like to call our meeting to order. We'll start with the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Have the clerk please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Clerk Hopkins here. Treasurer Horning.
Here.
Trustee Kalani.
Here.
Trustee Germain.
Here.
Trustee Harper.
Here.
Trustee Petrucci. Here. Supervisor Fountain.
Here.
We have quorum of the board. We also have present Township Manager James Wickman.
Thank you. Item number 4 is approval of our meeting agenda.
So moved.
Support. Motion by Treasurer Horning, second by Trustee Germain. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Call to the public. Anybody call to the public this evening? Being none, we'll move on to item number 6 is approval of our consent agenda.
So moved.
Support. Motion by Trustee Petrucci, second by Trustee Harper. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Item number 7.1 is pending business, our video proposal. We tabled this or delayed it till this meeting. There were some questions on the contract, I believe. Joe, did you have a chance to review those or get with James?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're all set.
Is there any other discussion on that proposal this evening? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Kalani, second by Treasurer Horning. Any other discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Are you caught up?
Abstain. Yeah.
Okay. Item number 8.1, new business, 2015 through 2019 Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Manager Wickman.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor, and thank you for assisting staff with the review of those proposals. Interviewed 2 of the firms, and at the end of the day, the recommendation is to move forward with McKenna's proposal that is in your packet. McKenna, of course, did do the last parks plan and was our planner of record, has been for many years, so is familiar with the issues, and I'm sure gave them a leg up in getting prepared to do the next parks plan. You do have the core scope that is in budget, the $7,800. They have proposed 2 additional items for your consideration, and really we have no recommendation per se on that, other than to note that those would take us beyond what we budgeted. Of course, it is the board's pleasure to amend that budget if you see the merit in those additional works. That is for a vision session as well as a charrette of sorts, public visioning. So a park design workshop, and a public visioning session where the park design workshop would be like a charrette, somewhat similar to what we did at Oar Creek back in 2008, where we invite folks out and there's stations and people are kind of getting hands-on with the concept plans for the parks and giving input as one other way of giving input. And then the public visioning session is more of a facilitated discussion, more so with maybe with the board, but kind of bringing these things together and diving a deeper dive into the vision of what Parks and Rec looks like in Hartland Township. Those 2 additional items would be another $6,000 altogether over what's proposed, and I offer those for the board's discussion and thought.
I have some. I expressed these to you earlier. On the one hand, I often see the merit of having another updated Parks and Rec plan because of grant purposes. Are the items that we're looking at currently eligible for grants, or do you see any merit in proceeding in that regard because of the grants that are out there?
It's a very good question, and it was in my notes to take some time to talk about that very thing. I just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page as far as expectation. Certainly, one of the reasons we talk about doing a DNR spec park plan is so that we're eligible for those DNR grants. As I look at the horizon at the type of projects that we've been contemplating, those aren't the ones that fit into the wheelhouse of a DNR grant. I'm not saying there aren't any, or that we couldn't give it the old college try and maybe even be successful with those, but I think that's probably limited to anything related to nature trails, nature observation areas, maybe you get a picnic pavilion structure out of a DNR grant. Those would be the types of things that are most likely to be eligible for those grants. Now, I offer that not to say let's not do the plan, because certainly we've got a lot of thoughts on the table about parks plan, and on that merit alone, it may be worthwhile to put together a very intentional Parks and Recreation plan. I just don't want there to be any false expectation that that's going to put us in line for a significant amount of DNR grants. Now, this I'll acknowledge, as we went through the CIP process, that picture became clearer and clearer to me. I don't know that I would have seen as much going back maybe even a year ago, or when we set the strategic plan out. I just am looking at the types of projects that we're looking at in the next few years as not ones, and there's been significant changes at the DNR level. The amount of funding that they're putting out of the trust fund for procurement grants, for development grants, has significantly gone down. It's become more and more competitive, and the lean has been much more to those other types of projects. So those things coming together, make me want to pause and just make clear that grant eligibility should not be the major driving force for doing the plan. The other thing to that is that if you look at the DNR grant guidelines, there's ADA all over that, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that historically the types of developments we see in the parks here have not tried to make ADA compliance at every corner. And so if we were to do a project through a DNR grant, that would have to be, and slopes and everything else that goes with that, you could end up in a position where you have a project that costs twice as much just so you can get 50% grant or worse than that, which may be okay. I just want to acknowledge that should we, like a lot of things, like going after a federal grant for a road, suddenly you have to build the road to a higher standard, and I don't know that you're that much further ahead than when you started as far as cost goes. I just want to acknowledge that those are some real things I'm seeing there.
Well, that brings up an interesting question then.
Yeah.
If we go after the DNR type grants, are we going to run into the same type of restrictions that we encountered with the grant we had at Settlers Park, or Heritage Park, that we ended up paying back because of the restrictions and so forth?
Fair question, not necessarily, because that was under the procurement grant program. This would be under the development grant program. Yes, they would limit, you can't build, buildings and things with it, but whatever you build, it's there. And
are they going to dictate who can come there, when they can come there, and all that kind of stuff? And
no, they can't do that, but they can dictate the standards by what you have to use money for.
It's under development grant. It's not.
They can't say because it was public money used as a grant that the entire state of Michigan can go to the park if they want. That's what they did over. That's what they were telling us over
That's
there.
what happened on the
And
other.
that's a good question. That's exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably some of that. If we were to suddenly make it a fee for entry type park, that might be against it. It's not quite the same in that this isn't a matter of the state of Michigan and Hartland Township own 50-50 on the piece of land. It's they contributed towards development on land that we still own and can still rule and regulate. They're only going to build things that meet their goals. And so, our restrictions, any grant is going to have restrictions. We can't turn around and tear it out or start charging.
I mean, we want guests to enjoy the park.
Yeah, right.
We do that, public and so forth. Mm-hmm. I just have a big problem with them dictating to us what we can do.
It's much less restrictive than it had it been a procurement grant.
My concern is more of a question of why, and we've talked about this. Does it really make sense when it's unlikely that Hartland will be looking to acquire new properties and develop them? That what we have and what we've developed in terms of our plans are fairly well developed. We kind of have an idea of an inventory of what we need. The last Parks and Rec plan obviously looked at how many fields for soccer, football, baseball needs and then looked at population and needs of our community. And overwhelmingly, the last park plan also, and many of the people in the community expressed a desire for passive recreation. So I'm trying to understand what more would a new plan or hiring someone to undertake a new plan, doesn't it make more sense to take those dollars and really put them into the park systems themselves on what we already have in place? I mean, we have limited dollars anyway, and yes, this isn't a lot of money. Unless I'm convinced that the setting aside dollars and going forward with revising our master plan for parks is going to lead to some sort of grant dollars, I'm not convinced that it's really necessary to even move forward with this. This is just my perspective on it.
Well, can I follow up with what you just said? You said that the driving force shouldn't be DNR grants and so forth. What would be the driving force?
Yeah, it's a very good question. My answer to that would be if I'm hearing various conversations from the board over the years right, probably the biggest piece missing isn't the inventory or how many more baseball fields we need or those types of things. It's have we captured the residents' vision for Parks and Recreation in Hartland? And as we get more and more years away from that 2008 plan, it seems to me that some of the conversations have brought more and more questions about, okay, we done good at the first couple of phases of this, now is a good time to reevaluate, and we've got a good infrastructure in place for garnering public participation and input, that this is a good time to do it. You don't necessarily have to do it through a parks plan or a DNR spec one. If you wanted to, if that was really the only piece that we wanted to make an investment in a very intentional, public engaged process of visioning what parks, what the next 5 years of parks investments looks like, you could do that certainly in a more cost-effective way by taking pieces of that. That would be my assessment of what I've heard at this table over the years.
And when we did the interview process, if you go to page, let's see if I can find what page number it is on their presentation here. It's the project work tasks. The first one is basically the staff here is going to put all the information together. They just did the documents. Here's my question is what's our return on investment? A lot of the stuff that is already done. McKenna's already done most of this, except updating to the plan what we've done since it was a concept plan when they first did it.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm trying to figure out really, and I know they're going to have some public participation in their existing plan. What I had a hard time was them justifying to at least myself is a design workshop with the public. And my concern is, all of a sudden, it's like we went around before to the different, we went to like Cool Coffee and said these people were throwing out ideas. So if we have a workshop and there's these ideas that come to the forefront, is there no expectation that we're going to be able to, and I think it's important to get the people's the information somehow, but I mean, a design workshop with a group of 40 or 50 people, to me sounds like it would be almost starting over.
That's kind of the part that bothered me even in our last, remember we had the visioning sessions? Well, there was a couple people with very forceful voices there that went from table to table, and, I think you all know who those people were, some of them, and kind of, I thought were pushing their plan versus, and these little coffee things, you get a couple boisterous people there. I want a broader base, you know.
And we talked about doing some things like through some of the avenues that we have right now. What's a couple of them that we're using?
Mind mixer,
Mind mixers, Facebooks, and those types of things. But I was trying to, I'm having a real hard time justifying spending $6,000 on a vision workshop and a design workshop. Now, Dave actually feels that by revising this based on what was projected the first go-around of the $6,500 or $8,500, their first, but he thinks that would be a good thing for us to do, so we would get public input to make sure we're on the right page. But personally, I'm having a difficult time going above and beyond that initial, more than what the initial scope was, because that makes the plan DNR accessible or ready.
It does.
So the basic plan does. You don't have to go the extra 2 layers to get the plan.
The baseline is the $7,800, and a significant part of that is that one of the deliverables are concept plans for the 2 parks. And if you recall, looking at those other proposals from other firms, that was an additional fee from a lot of them. It's most likely because they already had a lot of the CAD files that they're ready to go on that. But and we can do public participation through other means to bring that back to a Parks Task Force to lean into and kind of come up with concept plans about.
Right.
Yeah, I'm having a problem with that too, Bill.
So again, it's not...
I just, I kind of like what the board has started with. Well, let's take the memorial, for example. There is a committee of concerned citizens coming from all different areas who have a passion to do something for a memorial. And the plans that you've seen come out of that were visions of all these people working together and putting it together, and because they have a passion to do this. And I mean, it's changed several times, and we came up with a final plan. I mean, why couldn't that be done for other areas of the park, for a children's playground? People that would come together, maybe the moms groups would come together and put a committee together and that would recommend to the board and put a vision together. I don't know why we need to pay somebody to do that.
Well, I think it's just another layer, really. And I think exactly what you're saying is what McKenna will propose. Maybe not in the direct way you're talking about, but in the end, isn't that, they come up with several concepts and programs, and then they call a meeting together, and they get those interested groups to come together. I think, based on our experience with the roads and pathways, I thought our township did a pretty good job. We didn't have a consultant come in on that, and I'll tell you, the public input we received on the roads and pathways so far, I've seen has been reasonable and responsible and looking at. They understand the problem, they understand the need, and they understand where money should be directed. And I'm just wondering. Now, don't take it for what this is worth, but a lot of times we hire consultants because we want them to develop a program where we would like to see something where we want to go. We've already had that, really. Unless there was a necessity for bringing them in for grants purposes, that we have a consistent program that we can use for applications, and that's why we need to update it.
So maybe hearing two ideas. One is to stick with the $7,800 scope, and then put together a good Parks Task Force and do some homegrown public participation like we did with the roads.
I like that approach.
That's what I do too.
Yeah.
I think it's because it's being brought in by the task force themselves. They're the ones leading that charge versus a consultant who. I don't know if they have as good a pulse as a task force would. Although they would be probably they would be the facilitator of it.
Yeah.
But we could facilitate that in-house, I would think.
I look at, don't take this out, the board should consider this. We have a professional on staff who's a professional planner. He's, in my mind, knows how to do this kind of work. Now, the question is does he have the time to do it? We're not inundated with a tremendous amount of development. I'm just wondering why we aren't considering some sort of hybrid where I mean, if we're already
We
having
are.
staff putting much of the information together, again, I'm trying to understand why we need to spend $7,000 on a consultant if all they're going to do is take what we have and put it together in a format. And $7,000 seems like an awful lot of money when we have our organizations who are concerned about how they're going to raise money on their own to help manage because the approach we're taking on our Parks and Rec is to hire our local HIA and soccer associations to operate and maintain our active parks, and they're doing everything they can to do that. And I just think that I'm wondering if these dollars are really necessary when we have 2 parks, we have plans out there, we kind of have an idea of what we would like to see in there, we already have an idea of what the public would like to see. Maybe we need to have a little more general public. I'm just throwing that out, whether it really, should we even be spending any money on a master plan? That's just a question. I'm not necessarily opposed to it or against or for it. I want to make sure that this board understands you're hiring a consultant and you're spending dollars on information that they're going to take that's going to be put together by our staff. They're not doing anything. They're just gathering it together and facilitating it and putting it in a manner that people can understand.
A good chunk of, we certainly evaluate how much of this could staff do, and I think what's here is an optimal balance of that. One, planning is no shortage of strategic plan goals for this year, and the planning director himself, his time is sapped, and we're relying heavily on the part-time planner to assist with this and have given some hours for this. So I think that balance is there. There is something to be said, a planner is not a jack of all trades necessarily. Our planner's experience with doing parks plan on a regular basis is not what McKenna would bring to the table, so I give him credit there. $7,800, there's a good chunk of that in the thousands of dollars that would be the deliverable of the concept plans. Those concept plans, if we were to just do them alone, would be a few $1,000s. So I think that accounts certainly for a bit of it. I'm hearing different ideas. If we want to try to figure out a different scope of work to get to a plan, through public participation, we can do it. I think probably what's on the table is $7,800 using our established public engagement tools. Sounds like the happy medium, if you will.
Well, here's my concerns. I mean, I've heard at different times throughout the last several years about the plan that was put together in 2008 and whether we got the correct mix of people to be involved in putting that plan together. And I've heard that more than one time, questioning that. We had meetings a year ago at different venues. I went to a couple of those. We had very few people show up. They offered some ideas, and I don't know that we were very good at getting those ideas from that point to the board and so I kind of question that whole methodology. We talk about how well that's worked for us. It may have worked well in Safer Roads initiative, but I don't really see that it worked, and it may have been premature even at the point we were having those discussions at the coffee places and stuff, and we may not have had an avenue for that input to get brought through to the board and to a plan. But I mean, that's my concern, is that without some formal initiative on what this ends up looking like in the end, and then why even bother doing any of it? I mean, if you're okay with the plan we have already, then the board just continue to make decisions, but I mean, we've heard from people out there in the community that have ideas. It'd be great to have some way to get those people engaged and behind some of these initiatives to do some of these things. So,
I will tell you, you've got a waiting list for that Parks Task Force. I mean, there are people who are interested to be a part of that. However we decide to approach it.
Matthew, do you have any input?
I have a couple questions. I was wondering who was the second firm that was interviewed, and why was McKenna selected as the one?
Bill could probably speak with better authority than I. I wasn't at the interviews.
Recall the name of the...
Rowe.
Yeah, it was Rowe.
Yeah, Rowe.
Rowe out of Detroit, or not Detroit, Flint area.
Flint area.
Maybe Davison, or... McKenna just, they gave a much clearer presentation, and their scope was very defined as to what they were going to do. And if we wanted to get plans, like a conceptual plan, it was going to be an additional amount. They were going to spend more time capturing the task force, per se. They were going to spend more time on that. Then if we wanted a plan or something solid to go forward with at the end, that was going to be additional. And McKenna's first part, they took out like the design workshop and the visioning workshop, but they're still having three workshops. But at the end of the day, you get the plan. So that was why we thought it was a better deal. I think the numbers were very close. I think they were close. And then the extra part was McKenna had done it in 2008, and they had all the baseline information. And Amy Neary, right? It's not Amy, it's Amy Chestnut, I think is her name now. She was going to be part of this again. So that history we felt was important.
I noticed that in Bob's operational report that we had originally only allocated $8,000 for a new plan for the parks in our current budget year. Granted, we can change that, but was the two options that we've been discussing truly options, or is that the recommendation of the administrative staff here to exercise those options?
There are definitely options. We don't have a recommendation on taking those options or not. They put them in their proposal. We brought them to you for your consideration. We don't.
I felt that McKenna's initial scope without the visioning session was what we were trying to achieve, is get people in the community involved in a new conceptual plan, make sure that we're on task with what the citizens in our community are asking for us in our parks and recreation. And we actually felt that having not that we couldn't do it in-house, as Joe's maybe suggesting, but having the consultant might get us farther away from like the board making all the decisions. That the same thing the task force did for the roads, but just have a different facilitator.
And I know that we have an active park site plan committee that has been assisting Bob periodically, in the past. But I don't know who they are. But I'm wondering if that is the same type of committee that McKenna was recommending or suggesting in their...
Probably not. A quick review. When we did the 2008 plan, there was a steering committee, and there was a pretty broad base. You had representatives from the various recreational organizations, a couple of at-large citizens. There was a dozen-plus folks that sat on that steering committee. So certainly that would have been their experience with us before. So if we were to take that a step further, so it looks more like our roads task force and basically, more people at the table, I think they'd be familiar and comfortable with that.
What I was trying to say is that and I don't know if this is true or not, I might be reading into McKenna's proposal, but it sounds like they recognize that the township board has ultimate authority. Then there is a group of people appointed by the township board, which they call Parks and Recreation Committee. And then that committee would report to our DPW director, and then they would be working for him. I'm trying to find out if our current Park Site Plan Committee, which are the words you use in your reports, Bob, is that intended to fulfill that role, or do we not have that committee?
That'd be a question for the board, because we actually have two Parks Committee. One's a more general Parks Committee, and so the board would have to decide who the best three board members for that task force might be. You could choose however you like.
Being on that committee myself, if there are other board members that would like to be partake in that, I'm not so set on. I think it's however we want to go with it. If we want to have a fresh look at it with new board members, I think that's a good way to approach it as well.
I was just trying to find out who McKenna was thinking of in that.
I was thinking, they were thinking of the task force that was part of the one in 2008.
Yes.
You had the high ed group, you had community ed, and I'm going to miss a bunch of them, but the bigger organizations that already have, what do you want to call it, organized teams.
And we had
baseball.
but we had like Barb Gazda, who came from the high school with the viewpoint of the kids who don't participate in organized sports. And then we had Peggy Seabolt for the seniors, didn't we? I mean, it was tried to be
We tried to cover the whole spectrum of areas that were opportunities for Parks and Rec.
That sounds like a good idea, and I would support that, but we're kind of diving into agenda item 11-2 now, trying to figure out how we want our public works to function in the future for that department. Those were only questions that I had.
Glenn, do you have any comments?
I think I could live with the first proposal, the $7,800 proposal. I think, like Joe said about how our task force, the roads task force, worked really well. And you really do get some good input from the people that way. And having a couple of board members on that task force, too, is just, you see it work, you know. I don't know if there's the same interest in the parks as there is in the roads, because not everybody uses the parks. Everybody uses the roads. So I don't know if you're going to get that same type of interest, but...
Well, James said that there's
Yeah, a couple people I can think of who have expressed interest. It may turn out to be that you have less passion for it. I don't know. There's a lot of Facebook conversations.
Can you expound on when you mentioned that you've heard comments about the existing task force that was part of that? Was it people questioning who we had on that to begin with, or you mentioned something in your comment here a few minutes ago that you heard a lot about the existing Parks and Rec committee?
I just remember from 2008, as we try and work through this plan and putting these two parks together, that they felt that there was people that were, and I don't remember what level these people were at. I don't know that they were at the committee level, if they were at the visioning session. I just remember that there being some comments that some people that were against really park development seemed to have some influence on the development of what was put together. And I wasn't on the steering committee for the 2008 plan, and I have a hard time remembering the facilitation, the community facilitation.
Yeah, I was on both. I was at both, and as I recall, it was the session over at Oak Creek that gave a lot of people angst. But, it wasn't a large group of people there, and the ones that were there were kind of, I don't want to say railroading it, but they had a lot to say.
What is the baseline?
7,800.
I know. Oh, I see I know the number. I'm just curious why baseline total includes concept plans for heritage and settlers parks. Well, wouldn't you develop the concepts after you've gotten the visioning information, or why would you develop something why would the baseline be something before, it's almost like you need to have the visioning concepts before you can develop the baseline.
You would.
And so...
And she's got it listed.
What I'm saying is the baseline bill is 7,800 when you have, Rowe and Spicer coming in, $3,000 less, even less on Carlisle and Workman. Carlisle, he's been around a long time. He's a statewide, I'm just...
But if you read McKenna's plan, it says, kickoff meeting, evening focus groups, design workshop, visioning sessions, way before he gets to creating the plans.
Well, but that's an option.
No, that's under meetings, that's under the big...
Now, there would still be, instead of
that's under the
a
baseline.
big production,
Right.
if you will, about a visioning, it's them meeting with a committee, or the
Right.
task force. And the
Well,
task
I guess I'm misunderstanding this,
Yeah.
because it says 2,500 for a visioning workshop and a design workshop for 3,500.
Those are extra.
Extra.
And they're extra, but that's what my concept was. I'm just trying to understand why.
There would still be elements of that on a much smaller scale within the task force work product itself. They just would be, if the task force wanted to go out and do online surveys or hold public meetings, it'd be on the task force to do that.
Look, I'm going to be just kind of common sense about this whole thing. Heritage Park has all the fields already installed. I mean, at the end of the day, we're probably looking at maybe a pavilion and some bathrooms and, playground and a couple of those. Maybe
Expanded parking lot, trails.
Expanded parking lot. I just don't see what Heritage Park is going to require a whole lot of consultant work on. I can do that myself, and I'm not a professional in that regard. I know what we have, I've seen it, and I've seen what we got. You're not going to build anything over there that's going to take away from, what we have already there. So you're going to build on the areas that we already know from the second phases. We developed that already. So I take Heritage Park off this whole plan, because I don't see that being anything that McKenna can improve upon. I truly don't. Now, Settlers Park, on the other hand, I see them, okay, what are their thoughts on it? We've talked about having a band shell or some sort of pavilion for having outdoor concerts. And I've been approached by people on that that are very interested in that and very interested in participating in a community kind of thing that might be, that they could pursue that. We have, that concept plan also calls for a sledding hill. It calls for a playground out here, a baseball diamond. I'm trying to understand what more are we really going to get by having McKenna prepare a report. And I just don't see the value in it. I see spending this kind of money when we have priorities in this township that really need to be addressed. I think we just get plan upon plan upon plan. That's just my 2 cents. I'm not opposed to this. I'll listen to all the other board members, and I'm just struggling with why we need this. But that's my opinion.
So if we want to approve the baseline plan tonight, can we say to move to have the supervisor sign the contract removing Section 3, Item B? Which is the 2 optional.
Or the optional comes back to us.
If you feel that you need it.
No, you just, on the 4th page of that
Okay.
agreement is where you would check yes or no on those options.
Okay.
So,
You just put no.
put no on those if that's what you wanted.
See, if you-
Oh, I see.
You would just,
Okay.
you would put no.
Okay. Then I will move to have the supervisors sign the McKenna contract for the baseline amount, checking no under design and visioning workshops.
Support. Motion by Treasurer Horny, second by Trustee Harper. Any more discussion?
Just to clarify, it'd be for the supervisor and the clerk. There's
Okay.
two signature lines there.
Okay.
Are we in discussion?
Yes, we are.
In the planner's operation report, he was hoping that we would approve the full budget and then allow them to decide whether it was beneficial or not.
I know that's what he wanted, but that's not the way it is.
Just wanted to point that out. Everyone
And Dave and I
realized,
had that discussion and suggested that we have that as a separate line item that's voted on before we let the decision go to the task force. Any other discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next item of new business is Settlers Park Memorial Phase 1 design. So with that, are you the committee chair, Joe?
Actually, Bob's going to handle this one today.
Okay. Mr. West, good evening.
Essentially, the Memorial Committee has met, and we solicited 3 quotations for the design and engineering of what we'd like to segregate into Step 1 and Step 2 of Phase 1. We've actually divided Phase 1 into 2 different steps. What is before you this evening would be the proposal for the design and engineering, essentially, to basically obtain more accurate and precise construction estimates, the tools to effectively fundraise for future steps of this particular project. We essentially solicited 3 quotations for these services. The Memorial Committee has made the recommendation to award the services contract to Gary Corneo, who also is a member of the Memorial Committee and has already quite a bit of time and effort put into this project. We feel he'll be a valuable resource since he originally designed the concept sketch, which everybody was on board with. So that's what you're presented with this evening.
Do you have a picture? Do you have a drawing of the whole project? You can show them what we're talking about.
I believe it's in the packet. I don't have access to the packet here.
Yeah, I'll try to find it.
So can you just, I'm on the Phase 1, Phase 2 project. Phase 1, looks like the cost is going to be $63,660. And then Phase 2 is an additional $114,000.
Those are preliminary construction estimates. Basically, the fees that would be approved this evening would be to basically tighten those numbers up and develop the tools to accurately fundraise for this particular project. But yes, what you do see in front of you are the preliminary construction estimates.
I'll make a motion to authorize the supervisor to sign an agreement with Gary Corneo for consultation services on Phase 1 of the Settlers Park Memorial in an amount not to exceed $5,000.
Support. Motion by Trustee Kalani, second by Trustee Germain. Any other discussion?
This is within our budget, correct? Original budget?
Yeah, so we budgeted $50,000 for Phase 1 this year. So my understanding is the committee knows that, and hopefully construction estimates will come down under that number, and if not, they'd be trying to fundraise for that.
Yeah, we need the plans in order to get the donations.
Okay. Yeah, this is, yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Being none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 9 is board reports. We are in July. Clerk Hopkins?
Just like to let everybody know that we have received ballots for the August 5th primary election, and you can obtain an absentee ballot application by calling the clerk's department and get that filled out and get you a ballot. just want a quick reminder to the people out there watching that our next board meeting will be 3 weeks from tonight on July 22nd rather than the usual 2 weeks. And I'd just like to wish everybody a safe and relaxing 4th of July weekend.
Thank you. Treasurer Horning?
The tax bills have arrived today.
I got mine in the mail today, too.
I thought this year it's Michigan State colors, green and white, just for you guys. Last year they were blue and yellow, you probably didn't even notice. But anyway, they have arrived, and we get a lot of phone calls and from people who say, I got one, my mortgage company pays it. Well, the state law says we have to send one to every homeowner, and if you look in the top left corner, it does say you still will get one for information purposes only. So they should be in the mail the next day or two if you didn't get it today.
Thank you. Trustee Kalani?
I just want to remind everyone that the Hartland, next door Hartland Teen Center has a golf outing scheduled for July 27th at 2 p.m. at the Majestic Golf Course at Lake Walden, and it's a 9-hole golf course outing. This is one of our biggest fundraisers of the year. I encourage all the board members, if you can make it out to that event, we greatly appreciate it. We are looking for foursomes. The second thing, and I mentioned this last week to James, each year we renew our agreement. Probably should take a look at find out from the board if they'd be willing to enter into more of a 3-year agreement as opposed to an annual agreement. That was something that was just brought to my attention from James, and I think Hero would be supportive of a 3-year agreement versus a 1-year agreement. And we really would like to have that, if possible, James, on our next board meeting in July, because after all, we're coming up on our annual meeting in August, and it's also usually around the time when Hero has to make certain expenditures related to insurance and things like that. So, anyway.
Okay. Thank you. Trustee Harper?
No report.
Trustee Germain?
I would just echo what Joe just said about the golf outing. I think it is specifically dedicated to raising funds for the teen center, and so I would encourage as many golfers to come as possible. And just looking out a little further, there will also be a smaller scale fundraiser on the Heritage Days for the teen center, and they're going to be holding a spaghetti dinner at the September 8th, I believe, Hartland, at the Hero building. Even though a lot of the other activities will be downtown. So families can keep that in mind as well.
Thank you. Trustee Petrucci?
If you can't make it to the golf outing, it only costs us, it's very inexpensive to sponsor a hole. It only costs $100, and it's a full donation. So if you can't make it, throw $100 towards the kids and take it off as a donation. I just want to remind the public that our firefighters want to enjoy their 4th of July weekend as much as everyone. They would rather not be rushing people to the hospital that were careless with fireworks. So if you have fireworks and you're going to use them, please don't drink when you're using them. And please be very careful and safe, and make sure your kids are supervised. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Larry, I was just going to, not to put you on the spot here, but we had talked a little bit about the boulevard on 59, and just to let the board know that I think at our next meeting, we're going to try to bring something forward for some of the landscaping plants that are...
It's looking better, except for the one section.
There's one section, I think, that a lot of those shrubs have gone, but just want to let everybody know that Larry's been working with some different people on that, and we'll hopefully, I think we were going to try to have that at our next meeting. Because some of those, I think, are not going to make it at this point, now that it's July. And I'd like to thank the 242 Church. I drove by the Hero Center, I believe it was on Saturday, and there was 15 people out. They were painting the outside of the Old Township Hall as a community service, and I thought that was a very nice gesture on their behalf. So thanks to everybody that was part of that. James, Manager Whitman, you have anything?
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Just a couple highlights from the operation reports. The 18 tower lease, AT&T's put all future sites on hold, so there's no real further discussions on that at this point. The Blight Ordinance Committee took a look at some language, and we hope to have that back for you at the next meeting in 3 weeks. Board retreat, wanted to camp out there for a minute. I put out that October 3rd date, and we do have a board member with a conflict on that. Of course, we want to try to get everybody there. So the real issue at hand is that Dr. Bender's availability on a Friday is really limited over that 3-month span to that day. So if we needed to reschedule, we would need to talk about either a Saturday, which is still limited, or during a weekday. Now, the format, if you recall, that worked well for us, I thought last time, was that noon to 6 on a Friday afternoon. If the board's willing and able, we could do that on a weekday afternoon. I just don't know if that is something that would work for the board or not, as far as finding other days for Dr. Bender. Or we could try to use a different facilitator, I suppose, but...
Monday would be the only other day.
Monday?
Mondays.
Mondays?
Mondays, once the school starts, Mondays would be the only.
So looking at a Monday afternoon, like noon to 6...
I can make it work as long as well enough in advance.
Yeah, that's what I'd look to do. I'll find out his availability on Mondays and find some dates, if that's okay. Good. Otherwise, I did just want to acknowledge, since I wasn't here at the last meeting, but again, thank you to Tony Savoni for his years of service, and he's moved on to the Livingston County Building Department, and we are taking resumes for that ordinance enforcement officer position, and so that's open. And also, just interesting note, I don't know if you caught it in the operation report, our insurance renewal came in for liability insurance, and it went down more than $2,000 because we no longer contract with the Sheriff's Department. So, there's just in the grand scheme of things, that's in the pool of consideration.
This doesn't make sense to me.
It's just, well, it's a added liability for those activities that we're not contracting for it, but
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, I know, but you would think that you'd be a safer community with them here, so...
yeah, but it wouldn't be, we wouldn't be liable, I guess, and I don't say that to say whether or not, it's a good, perfect situation we're in at this point, just acknowledging that's part of it, and
By the way, not to go off on a rabbit trail, but have you heard anything from the county? Because the last month I haven't really said anything, because they were going to keep us in the loop, but that jail's supposed to open a year from a month ago. We're 11 months out.
I've heard something.
well, there was an interrogatory that went back and forth, and I think I provided those answers back to the board. My understanding is that...
They didn't answer half the questions that I had. I mean, I had a whole sheet full of questions, and he, not to say he could or couldn't, but didn't answer the ones that were...
I've not heard any further to answer your question.
Perhaps we should have them come back to our next meeting and give us another update.
My suggestion would be to invite Mike Murphy to a meeting to get the straight answers.
I will,
With Dave Domas, have
Dave
both here.
I will do an outreach.
But Dave is no longer on the committee, is he?
I can. The only thing that I've heard is that there's their committee at the county has recommended to the commission to hire 4 new sheriff deputies for the jail, specifically for the jail.
Right.
I don't know if anybody else has heard.
Dave Domas told me that himself 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I think it's on their next agenda.
If it pleases the board, July 22nd is probably going to be a heavy agenda. And I'm also due to compile information. The strategic plan said I'd be bringing a report back to the board end of July, so in August, if maybe it makes sense, if the board has...
I just want to
Yeah.
make sure that
Right.
we're not losing that vision of what this is going to look like a year from now.
It's the strategic plan said we're going to very intentionally talk about that after the end of July, so if we could...
Okay, so that'll be in August?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else?
Need some shires and some leaves, right?
I'll call her. Anything else?
Happy to answer any other questions the board may have.
Questions for our manager this evening? Being none, we'll move on to item number, information discussion, 11-1, Safer Roads Plan. Manager Whitman?
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. I just wanted to take a minute to intentionally acknowledge we haven't necessarily had a conversation with the board as a whole since the task force last met in early June, and a couple of revisions were made. We certainly have provided those to you, but just wanted to acknowledge here at the board table, since the last draft you had seen, that they had taken sidewalks out of the millage question. That one of the major decisions was to make the millage all about roads, and in doing that, they certainly haven't forgot about sidewalks, and it was certainly quite a bit of discussion to this end. Part of that compromise, if you will, is that should the voters approve that millage, then the $100,000 a year that this board had talked about investing, their recommendation would be to invest that in the sidewalks, that an approved millage would free up those monies for sidewalk investments, and we could still get done the sidewalk projects that were in the previous drafts of the plan. And further, that they would like to see those projects as a part of the upfront bonding so that the projects get done in the first couple of years and not spread out over the 10 years. That was an important piece of their recommendation, so that there was a comfort level that the projects were being committed to and being done. And then the bonds could be paid back with the $100,000 from the general fund that we were saying we would set aside for that. And so in moving those projects around, the other thing that they did with the monies that were freed up in the millage were to add 2 more road projects to that. One is for the repaving of Reed Road, and then the other was for some gravel maintenance on the gravel portion of Blaine Road from Maxfield up to where the pavement ends. So those 2 projects were added. So those were the significant changes that were made. Of course, if you got your property tax bill, you got a copy of the summary of that and point you to the website. And there's a survey question by postcard or online. Those have already started to come in. Actually, they started coming in yesterday and online. And so we'll collect that information, that feedback. We'll have a public hearing on the 22nd. And the task force will reconvene the following Monday, make any determination on finalizing their draft recommendations, and then at the first meeting in August, that'll be back here in front of the board to finalize the plan and to approve ballot language. So that's what's happened. Very healthy discussion of the task force, and certainly probably one of the more difficult decisions that they had to come to.
Are we publishing that meeting date as a public hearing anywhere other than just on those postcards?
It was in Community Life. It was in our press releases. And that would be it. It's certainly not a statutory public hearing.
When we put that $100,000 a year of general fund money, what impact does that have on our capital improvement fund? Has that already been adjusted
In the CIP we adopted tonight, it's in there.
with that money out of it?
Yes.
That's why I'm trying to find it real quick.
Yeah, so if you go back on the consent agenda,
What agenda item was that again?
6.6.
Oh, so for some reason it's 8.
So I always just go to the last page is the cash flow.
Okay, hang on one second. So that's under 6, that was in the, yeah, I read it in the consent agenda. Okay. So it's on the last page.
Yep.
All the way down to the very, very end?
Yeah, I just, that's the short version of the plan from my perspective is, because that's a 3-year cash flow. The surplus projections out of the general fund, which are shown with a note in parentheses 1, year-end surplus transfers from general fund, 310,000 this year, 375 next year, 380 next year. We had already in the budget, in the 2-year budget we looked at, we had already pulled 80,000 a year out of that budget for roads. So because we changed that to 100,000, we've taken an additional 20,000 out of what was already there. That's what that note is referring to. But it's in there. It's in those cash flows for the CIP purposes for what would be general fund surplus and what would be available for the capital fund.
Okay, and this one only goes out to like year 2017. But,
Yeah, for the CIP.
But in reality, that commitment would be going for the next
For a 10-year period.
10 years. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we had that number tied.
As we continue to do, yes, multi-year budgeting, we would have that in there.
Are there any other questions from the board for our manager? Would you be looking for a motion to go forward with a plan, to go forward with a ballot proposal? Or?
That would be the first meeting in August would be the ballot proposal.
Do you need anything other than a thank you from the board? That I think the task force did a very, very nice job. For all those that I think they did actually exceeded my expectations, and it was very well done and gathered a lot of good information. So thanks to those that were on that. So we don't need anything formal?
Nothing tonight, just bringing you up to date.
All right, thank you. Any other questions on that? Being none, we'll move on to item number 11.2, Public Works Vision. Bob, you'd probably be part of this discussion, I would take.
And I can just kick it off. We had Trustee Kalani and Trustee Germain, we had a good discussion after the water system in-house study, and there's more information pending, of course, before we bring that back to the board. One of the topics that came up in that discussion is, what is long-term, what does Public Works look like in Hartland Township for the next 5, 10, 20 years, and how does, of course, that was in the context, how does this decision about staffing the water system fit into that? But we kind of thought that was a good decision, a very preliminary, very, very preliminary discussion that, was going well there. We thought it would make sense to bring back to the board to have, again, a very preliminary discussion about what does Public Works look like 5, 10, 20 years from now in Hartland Township. And of course, there's a number of different ways that could look. One of the ways that the in-house water system staffing approach looks at is a model where we have the human resources in place to pick up small issues and projects as they come. This was, as you recall, the piece that I was not necessarily trying to put the focus on the merits of bringing it in-house, but was a very strong reality to us is that by having staff that we can direct not just to water, but to parks or snow removal or whatever, Hero Center, whatever else issue might come up, was an important thing that we saw a need for in the future as we continue to expand more facilities on the parks, more growing capital investments, those types of things. So that's the gist of it. I don't know if any of the trustees would add to that, or but we just kind of wanted to start that discussion here. type of...
From just a general perspective, most municipalities are, it seems to me, they're doing more and more outsourcing to the companies that are already in business. So, I don't know if it's, why would they be going away from that, and why do we think that we should be getting into that realm? I mean, I'm trying to figure out why Hartland would be different than a lot of other entities that are starting to sub a lot of their stuff out.
I don't know that I'm seeing that. Maybe if you had some examples of the types of things we're talking about, we could talk about the merits. I mean, I always say, this is the general contracting thing, that there are a number of factors you ought to consider seriously contracting out for. One is a serious level of expertise that you can never attain or don't have in-house, serious investment in equipment or tools or whatever it would take to do that job, where the cost of labor or a very restrictive collective bargaining agreement could be an impediment to getting what you need done. That's where privatization makes sense a lot of times. Otherwise, maybe there's certainly been a move towards consolidation of services.
Let me put this in a different perspective. People can only manage a certain amount of people, so you need another layer of management. And the more, the bigger that we get, the more managers you're going to have. And my concern is that everybody's time here is stressed and stretched tight already. That's my understanding. And the more things we get into, the more assistant managers you're going to have. And that's a real concern of mine. When we start talking about landscaping, start talking about doing mowing, and that's the business kind of that I'm in, and I know that it's not cheap, and it starts to add up, and then the next thing you know, you've got a building, you've got a mechanic, you've got all the different things that go into a business that we're not in right now, where I know we pay more for people to do that, but they take all that, all the grief and all the other things that go with it. So I want to make sure that there's a real defined cost savings before we start getting into that. When you start plowing, we got to plow on our truck, and this last winter, it probably aged that thing like 4 years compared to a normal year. Then the transmissions start getting weak, so the list goes on and on. And again, this year, we got the sugar deal probably because we had a contract, and the contractor probably lost their rear end on it this year. Now, some years you don't get any snow. But a year like this, would we have to hire another person because we were so far behind? I don't know the answer to that, but when we start talking about different layers of management in a bigger system, it's hard to get out of. As soon as you're into it, it seems like it's very difficult for government to get out of doing something that they've done. That's just my 2 cents worth of my observation. Is that what you're looking for tonight, right?
Well, it's not necessarily, and I didn't want to focus this only on that's the only model of what Public Works could look like here. I would just, if you had to do it over again, would you contract that stuff out, or would you do it with staff?
What's that?
Your operation.
Well, we talked about that, but I know my operation very well, and there's not layers of hardly any management. I run a single operation. If I had to run a bigger, like a big management company of sorts, yeah, you would have to have that, but they don't run it very efficiently unless unless you have the right people in that specific business. Here, we're going to start getting into lawns and different, like water. You're getting into a lot of different elements. And there's an expertise portion of every layer of that. So people can't be good at everything.
Sure.
I don't have an electrician on hand, and I don't have a plumber on hand. I use, like you would here. We could have one on board, but couldn't afford them.
It wouldn't make sense to.
It wouldn't make sense to.
Certainly wouldn't make sense.
But again, when you start opening up the doors of people using chainsaws, and the list just goes on and on and on, and it becomes a completely different portion of our business that needs a lot of attention.
It certainly would be.
That's just how I feel.
Well, and to your point, I guess I would say this. Make no mistake, managing a bunch of contractors who do those things is not that much less time-intensive than managing a staff or even a middle management that deals with those things. And in the case of, in some of these cases, I dare say, it takes more of our time to manage that contractor relationship and understand that may mean a change, but it's just kind of the nature of the contracting business, that having somebody or a group of somebody overseeing a bunch of contractors doesn't mean we can kick our feet up on the desk and it's an easy ride. There is a lot of work involved there, and for all intents and purposes, each of those contractors is a middle management to their staff. So I don't know that the time investment, I certainly understand all those other concerns. It's just, and we wouldn't, each of these things, I'm trying to keep the 30,000-foot view, because I'm not totally convinced that we do our own mowing or do our own whatever. We would look at those each on their own merits, on cost versus, reward and risk and all those other things. So we're trying to back off some of those details as we were talking about that, to say what could or what do we know we want to avoid. If the board is not interested in a scenario where we've got additional staff or additional layers of staff that are responsible for those things, because you have your reasons for not doing that, let's put that on the table. Let's know that that's either the boundary against which we're not going to cross, or whether it's in the realm of the possible. Because otherwise, as we look at options and present to you cases for options or recommendations, we would look at the full gamut. If there's a scenario for what is not acceptable, then we would need to know what the board's consensus is on that.
I guess my opinion would be if we can get a better product and save taxpayers money, that's where I'm at. Whether it's in-house, out-house contracting, whatever we're going to look like. But if we're going to be able to save money.
You have to be careful with that, because everybody often takes a look at the bottom line is saving money, but there's another flip side to saving. It's service, and it's quality of service.
That's what I said, quality of service.
You cannot, I'm not expecting a Cadillac type of service versus a Chevy, let's say, but the truth is that there's probably not much difference. And so one of the concerns I have is that we bring it in-house, and it's very difficult, as Bill has indicated. Once you bring it in-house, it's very, very difficult to move away from that. And most organizations are moving more towards either partnerships with other municipalities, in the case of us, looking at other arrangements. I don't know, there's water systems involved in Livingston County that I don't know if we've explored how we might be able to form partnerships with them, with their O&M staff, or versus bringing someone in-house. I can guarantee you probably will save money initially, but in the long term, when you have to have professionals like electricians, maybe even engineers, civil engineers, to come in and analyze and consult, all of a sudden now you have staff that are going to be out there troubleshooting on most days, but you're still bringing in the experience. Now, if you had a full service program like United Water, supposedly you already had that, because that's what you're paying for, and you're hopefully paying for the economies of scale, because they're a big, large corporation that operates water systems and sewer systems. I don't know what the answer is. I've made suggestions on how we might approach this. I think we need to tread very cautiously. I understand that Bob doesn't really have, you don't really have an assistant, although the guy from Enloe does do a lot of stuff for you on your behalf on a contract basis, correct?
As needed for engineering services. Generally, when the projects may not reach a scale requiring full HRC staff personnel, so it's a much smaller organization.
Do you find that your job currently is more or less putting out fires versus, planning and prioritizing your tasks so that you can get them done? Are you finding you're more reactionary versus, say, planning and following through?
Quite frankly, I would say it's a variety, and it depends on season, what day of the week it is, what's coming over the weekend, budget year. There's many different factors that come into play when determining what the primary scope of my day-to-day activity is. So really, that's a tough one to put a nail on, to kind of pin down. Many different challenges, but
What are your thoughts are in terms of bringing water in-house? I know that you and I have talked, and so has Matt, and certainly I feel comfortable because of your experience, but I'm looking more for an objective perspective.
and certainly my role as Public Works Director is to, support the township manager and the township staff, and, I support his direction that he'd like to go with this.
That's not answering my question. You're a politician. I'm asking you because of your experience previously at Novi and operating, in the water system area, does it really make sense for us to bring in water in-house? Knowing what you know.
To be quite blunt, not without board support.
Well, yeah,
I don't want to do anything without the board supporting me.
How many people worked in the water department in Novi?
Their water department was 9 people, but then we bring on about 4 seasonal people for the summer. There was one division, if you will, of their public works, which was 42 full-time staff members and 20 to 23 seasonal.
In order to those people cross-train?
Yes, absolutely.
So if something happens to their sewer, you can go over work on water, blah, blah.
To a degree.
Well, but they're cross-trained to a degree.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody's a professional per se, but, certainly if we needed excavator operators and vice versa, if snow season hits, all the water and sewer guys were in plow trucks.
And how many, just out of the 9 people in the water department, were you in charge of were you on top of the water department and others underneath you, or?
Yes, I was a water sewer division manager.
Okay, and then did you have other managers under you within workers in that department, or?
They were a union organization, so basically I had nobody under me was an administrative employee. I'll phrase it that way.
To what, certainly I'm sure there's anecdotes of communities contracting out or what have you. I will tell you that in the last 5 years, obviously the whole EVIP program that we didn't have to participate in, fortunately, and the governor's push.
What was that for?
This was statutory revenue sharing. This is where the governor basically made all the cities demonstrate consolidation efforts, cost savings, those types of things. They had to provide very specific examples, detail. It was, I won't editorialize it, but even in that era, in that climate, I'm not aware of any public works department in southeast Michigan, certainly, but anywhere else in Michigan, that made a significant move towards even consolidating city, village, public works departments amongst neighboring cities that shared borders all around them. That there was, let alone contracting out items that became a significant part of their daily operations, such as more and more responsibility for areas that needed mowing or for plowing or for those types of things. Even as we look at our schools right in our own backyard, what they do, they're not contracting out mowing or plowing or those types of things. They're making good decisions over there based on almost the same type of environment to say that the best option is to do those things with our folks and our equipment.
Think about that for a minute. School covers a pretty large area. They already have the staff in place. Have we approached them as possible alternative to some of our public works needs, since they have a full-blown public works?
haven't talked talking about for mowing or those types of things? Potentially could. I don't know that,
I guess, James, I understand
That's what
where
I
you're
was
coming from.
thinking, too.
I just don't know if we've explored all the avenues before hiring a full-time person to come in-house. Now, I fully believe that in terms of the water aspects, that Bob, if he had staff, he could run it, because that's, based on my conversations, I think he would be fully capable of doing that. I just not quite sure I'm ready to, or convinced at this point that we haven't explored all other alternatives before. I mean, this is what's happening. My concern is that our expenses and revenue are going to converge eventually to a point where we're going to have to lay off people because, like, or hit a level where we're not being able to give, the increases or bonuses that we've been able to do over the years. We suddenly reach a point where our expenses are exceeding revenues. We're not going to be able to do the capital improvement projects that this board would like to have. I mean,
do you think we're trending that way?
well, think about it. At the end of the day, the property values have dropped. And in many cases, some of those have dropped to a point where they met the taxable value. So we're not going to see, our revenue projections are probably not going to increase greater than 2.5% to 3%, depending on the rate of inflation, right?
The property, other than if there's new construction, which obviously we're not going to try to hold our breath on.
Right.
Yes, if they're capped, then inflation is going to hold back.
So what are we doing in terms of expenses and maintaining that our expenses aren't going to increase at a rate that's greater than our revenue projections over the next
Well, I mean,
5 years?
that's not the water fund. The water fund is all user fee based, and
I understand it, but it's still money that comes out of people's pockets.
I understand. And property tax revenue represents about a third or less of the general fund revenue. State shared revenue being what it is, it's going to fluctuate with, consumer spending habits throughout the state of Michigan. But that is on an upward trend, and I'm not trying to say we hold our breath on that, but, we put $500,000 surplus in the general fund in the bank last year, and nothing to suggest that's getting smaller.
I guess with the water fund, how have our expenses and revenues increased over the last 5 years? What have we seen? What was the trend?
Percentage, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what those percentages look like. I mean, we're following the rate study, and we're meeting that at the 5-year point. We would be breaking even. Now, if we were to bring it in-house to save money, we'd get there sooner, but that's not, if you recall, the rate study said that did not take into account putting enough money away for repair and replacement, which we need to do after year 5.
So can I jump in here for a second? So, I mean, this conversation has gone all around with, I don't know what we're trying to accomplish with it. I mean, it started out as a discussion of whether we want to do in-house water study, then it came back as a discussion of public works vision, and now we're talking about the in-house water operation. And the in-house water portion of it, I mean, it's $60,000 less than what we pay right now. And if the staff is capable of managing that, I have a hard time seeing why we wouldn't, without some of the concerns maybe that Joe and Matt expressed several weeks ago. And, Matt had mentioned that, based on the size, he didn't know if we should be doing that yet, and Joe felt we should look at some other alternatives. But when we're talking about, the the rate study and not being able to fund the capital improvements to the degree, we've moved some of them back further out from what the study said, so that we didn't have to raise water rates as aggressively. And so here's an opportunity to save $60,000 of the water fund people's money. I guess I have a hard time thinking why we wouldn't want to do that. I'm not saying that's every issue on the table, but just at that small. The one thing I do want to add to it, and I guess I'm probably the person that was guilty at the administrative level, saying let's keep the conversation to the water portion, not talk about these other things in DPW. And I don't know that the board agreed with me, so I apologize if that was the wrong way to go. I would just offer that being around here every day, I do see Bob pulled in a lot of different directions that kind of sometimes make me recall the same thing happening to Raleigh when he was in that position. And we're paying Bob a considerable amount of money, I think considerably more than what Raleigh was getting paid, and kind of doing the same thing. I mean, we have a problem at Spranger Field bathrooms. Bob's going over there to deal with the bathroom issue. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I mean, you sometimes aren't always working at doing something that is the full level of your pay. I understand that. But I see it happen a lot with Bob, where he's the fall guy for everything operationally within the township and our properties, to where, it reminds me of the way everything got thrown on Raleigh's plate at certain times. So it just,
I'll say it's wrong. I mean, that other than, yes, from time to time, we have to jump in the trench, so to speak, and get stuff done, but generally speaking, because we don't have, it violates managerial economics for that to sustain that and this is a part of the issue of being able to have the person to say, go check out the bathroom problem, it's got to get dealt with, and that's the right person at the right level to take care of it. And that is a piece of this vision, and it's a piece of having the infrastructure in place with a cadre of folks in a water system. I don't know, and maybe to...
So my question is, I'm trying to relate this to what I do on a given basis. If I have an electrical problem, I call my electrician and say, get over there and fix it. If I have a plumbing problem, I call my plumber. I don't have all those individuals. Why wouldn't we have a list of 3 or 4 contractors that handle most of those things and say, you're my preferred contractor, you're going to, at the end of the day, I'm sure you end up calling them. I guess I'm trying to get my arms around some of that.
so can I jump in on that one, just because...
Because if the toilet backs up in here, you don't call Bob and say, Bob, don't you call up, say the pump,
So I used to work in facilities at Vistion. I was contracted that I worked at their facilities every day. I was a carpenter. But if light ballasts went out and they need to be replaced, it was cheaper for me to go do it than to pick up the phone and call an electrician that wasn't there to go do it.
And time-wise too, right? Wait for them to...
So I don't know that it's always cheaper. I'm not saying it isn't ever. I mean, if you don't have the skill set to do it and you're going to blow the place up by doing it,
I don't know.
Call somebody.
I don't know how much physical. I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but if the plumber, if the toilet goes out at Spranger Field, I don't expect you to go over and do it. I expect to call up somebody and do it. We don't have somebody. We don't have a a maintenance person around here to do those things. If we need a maintenance person around here to start doing those things, that's a completely different discussion. I don't know, I'm kind of going where you are now.
Yes and no, but they're not sitting in the back waiting. Somebody's got to assess the situation, figure out who we're making the phone call to. I'm sorry.
That's exactly what I was going to say. You need somebody to go over and assess the situation. Do you need a plumber, or do you need to take the plunger, unplug it a couple of times and clear it out? I mean, you're not going to call up a before you assess.
And that's not necessarily, probably not even the best example, but certainly there's just little stuff that isn't, it's actual general labor that you aren't going to contract out stuff that just needs to get done. And
Well, it's like watching you when we had the bad snow. James is out there in his dress coat plowing a path for us to get to our cars in the afternoon. That's kind of the vision I see with bringing the in-house water is we have a guy that's not always busy at the water department. I mean, that's kind of what I've been understanding, that could possibly do that, do something quick that needs to be done outside of being at the plant. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the scope is basically just to have somebody who's responsive. A lot of the issues I face, it's not necessarily the cost involved, it's the time.
Waiting.
The majority of contractors that we do have on hand, or on call, if you will, it's 48-hour turnaround, which, quite frankly, there's a lot of issues that can't wait that long. So.
can I ask, Matt, when the four of us were meeting, I think you brought up this topic, I think, first. Can you phrase maybe do you recall what the question you were asking that started this whole?
Not word for word, but in what both Joe and I have done a lot of work with municipalities, so I'm familiar with large and small ones as well. And of all of the departments I think we have at the township, we're going to get the most growth in people and management time and things like your bill in Bob's department as the township continues to grow. And while we specifically met, the four of us, to talk about other options to consider before we make a decision on what we're going to do with the water, the question that I brought up that kind of facilitated tonight's discussion was, we do not have a good vision yet on what we want our DPW department to grow into. So until we step back and say, what do we want DPW's future requirements, job description, if you will, to entail, if we can come up with that overall vision, and the example that I'm coming from is with the Hero Board. Hero Board wants to find ways to help improve the parks, but we're not getting any clear direction from the township on what needs to be done for fundraising and things like that. And it's not that we haven't made some progress, because we definitely have, but it gets back to the fact that we're asking Bob to do so many things already that his time is limited, as was already said. And so my question that I wanted us to discuss is, what do we want the DPW department to become? If we can look at that, what will they be responsible for? Usually when you think of a DPW department, you're talking 30 or 40 people for a mid-sized city. They have their own building. They've got, I'm envisioning we'll have a DPW building in the field behind us here or something, and there's so many things that we've been avoiding to some degree because we've been able to work out a mowing arrangement with this organization or another one, but we're really not looking clearly at, in 10 years, what do we want DPW to be doing? And I thought that if we could talk about those options and those potentials for the future, it would help us then better focus on the immediate question about what do we want to do water in-house. That's what I was trying to
get at.
Could that be something that's part of our retreat with Dr. Bender? Because I know he does deal with DPWs. That's one of his specialties, I think, is he does deal with a lot of DPW departments.
Yeah, we're certainly not trying to make any decisions tonight. We're
Yeah.
setting the table for that discussion.
But could that be part of that possibly?
Could be.
I know.
I would like to have you guys come up with what your vision is. I mean,
Right.
I have no idea what you do, really. I know you're the head of DPW, but I don't know, you know. You say you have to go and do these different things. I don't really understand completely what you do. So my question is, right now it's contracted, then it becomes ours. So are you telling me there's going to be a lot less effort now because it's in-house? That's hard for me to believe. So I'm just trying to put my arms around, you know, the stress of running a water system with 3 people. To me, sounds like a big job. That's kind of what was proposed. But maybe I'm.
It's done, and we certainly put some thoughts together. We'd be happy to do that. I think what my experience has been over the years is sort of dipped our toes in the water on what that might look like, and every time I do it, I get a little bit zapped back at me, frankly, and so we haven't gone to that discussion, but we do need to have that discussion. But I can tell you what it looks like. There are communities, big and small, throughout the state, country, and world that do public works, and they do it just fine, cutting their own grass, pushing their own snow, doing it with in-house staff, their own equipment, and it isn't stressful. It isn't. It's done, and it's done just fine and well, and it's done because you have better control over the quality. You can do it cheaper than it costs you to contract those things. It's done, and so that's in a nutshell the vision. I've had experience doing it. I've seen it. It can be done. That would be the most likely vision, is that we can do those things, save taxpayer money, better control the quality of the outcome, and have a more responsive organization, and be able to do more things because we have the agility in place to go left, go right when something comes up. We have to do it right. If we do it in such a way where we, become our own obstacle, or we wish we hadn't, or we get a collective bargaining agreement that's out of order, I would say that's our own fault, but that's my fault. If we do that wrong and we're clumsy and we're not doing it as well as we ought to, that's a responsibility you put on me and staff to make sure that doesn't happen. And the communities that do have that, and we hear the bad stories, that's their fault. And my job is to make sure that doesn't happen. And if I'm failing to do that, I'm the wrong person for you then.
Bob, just out of curiosity, if you would compare Novi's water system that you were in charge of to our water system, percentage-wise, how do they compare? Is it, like ours is 20%, 50% the size? What's your...
Just size by infrastructure, or size by connections, population served? Let's just say it's small. Let's just say it's small.
It's much smaller.
Much smaller. We're looking in the neighborhood of, I believe last count was 619 connections to our actual water system, and we want to say roughly when I departed there, we were about 9 to 10,000.
So it'd be safe to say that you could do this in your sleep, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I'd have trouble.
And it's fair to point, not to put Bob on the spot, your experience is not only in water department. You have other experience working in other areas of public works.
That is correct. I've done roads. I worked for Wixom's Parks and Recreation for 16 years. At the same time, I worked for Novi's Public Works and Water and Sewer Division.
I have complete faith that you can do it. I don't have complete faith that we can do it and try to save those 619 connection is $100 a year by bringing it in-house. I just have to do more due diligence on my own. So I will do that. But I just been around this, in my business a long time to know that you can spend $60,000 real quick. It's just, when we start getting down those roads of mowers busting and just...
One of the criticisms of public sector employees is that there never seems to be a top out, you know, I mean, there's, people get employed and then they get cost of living, you know, at some point, that job is only, it only pays that, it should only pay that amount. The public sector seems to go in a direction that you see artificial increases because that's what happens, you know, you know, people shouldn't, you know, they get regular cost of living and so forth. And I just, the concern is that, you know, we get people and all of a sudden now they're here for a very long time and people think we want to reward them for 30 years of experience or 25 years of experience and continue to make salaries and it's not commensurate with what job that they're performing. How do we deal with that? I mean, that's how we would deal with the public that feels that we should be looking to contract these things out versus paying people in-house and paying all the benefits and salaries that go along with it. That's really the question. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it or against it again. I'm just pointing out the reality of what public's perception is.
So isn't that our responsibility? I mean, if we let the wages get out of hand, that's us, okay? He can make the proposals, but we can say, wait a minute, this is getting too much. I mean,
I agree.
You know,
that's the point I'm making right now. This is a critical point in time. We are embarking on essentially bringing operations we typically have contracted out in-house. Virtually a very small system in-house. And part of the sale that I'm hearing is but we can use that person for all these other things that come up. And that's how we get the value that we wouldn't otherwise get.
but aren't we going to save $60,000 right off the top with the contract, right? These other ancillary
That's just doing water.
savings.
Right, that's
Okay,
just
that's just water. So if that person does anything else,
Right.
you know, that's
More savings.
Right, and that's part of the reason why I thought it should be just discussed in that.
Yeah.
Because all those other things are just,
Bonus.
But Larry, the good point that was made by Bill was, okay, you need to have, eventually, I mean, we do have an area where I suppose this building over here, we can house equipment. Eventually, that may not be big enough. You got to house that person where they're going to be. There's a place they have to sit down. You know, there's a lot more to just hiring a person to do water.
we already have a facility for the water where people work now. So we're not talking about having a
full-time.
facility.
It's not a full-time place, is it?
It's 1.5 FTEs.
Right.
There's somebody there, well, they don't sit there, they're out in the truck.
They work in
They work there, that's a
We
working
would need to buy a truck, right?
2 trucks probably.
2 trucks. 2 trucks, see? You got 2 trucks, you got equipment. What happens when we have to go out and hire an electrician for SCADA work, or when we have high-pressure issues that require some engineering and things like that?
No different than what we do now. We contract it out and we pay the bill. United Water's not absorbing those things. They have a maintenance cap that's a part of the allowance, and other things are on our bill anyway.
So where are we headed tonight?
Well, again, keeping the conversation in front of us, and a couple of you have put it better than I could, that perhaps we are at a crossroads of trying to make a decision of, you know,
There's
what...
no doubt in my mind that we can do it. But I just want to make sure that we are being very when you start hiring more and more people, and you start hiring equipment, that equipment's going to break down, it's going to be mechanics, it's going to be oil changes, then all of a sudden, now we need a mechanic, and then just doing this for my livelihood, I know that the grass business looks like it's easy, and it's not easy. It takes a real effort to have it done effectively, and it might not look like a lot of grass, but I don't think it makes any difference if it's one park or 5 parks. At some point, the layers of stuff have to keep going up, and that's when it gets expensive. When you have to hire another manager with the benefits. That's why I say that $60,000. It sounds like a lot of money up front, but the people part of this can be very cost prohibitive to get into. So when we talk about the vision that Matt's talking about, what this looks like down the road, at some point you need that whole other, not a whole other layer, but you need more management. And that then becomes not cost prohibitive, becomes cost prohibitive especially in a small system like what we have.
I would submit that, though, you're paying that through your contract. I mean, you're not, plus the profit margin. That's there. Those things, you've got crew leaders for our grass cutters, and they're making we're hiring from the same pool and trying to be competitive with that market. So we're not paying the markup.
I hear that a lot, too. I'm not trying to argue with you, James. I know all I hear, it seems like at budget time, is we got to be competitive with the market. We're going to lose people, and it's a whole different animal. That's just my 2 cents worth. Something that we're not in right now that I've said my 2 cents tonight.
So, again, no decisions tonight. We'll keep the conversation in front of us, and it can certainly be a part of our session with Dr. Bender.
Did you want to have this part of our strategic plan?
Yeah, I mean, there'd be some strategic decision-making here. Really, the only thing on the forefront is this water question, and we've got more homework that's due to you, and we'll do that before we got to consider that. And again, those other pieces will be brought individually on their own merits to make the case or not.
Okay.
Would it upset any of you if I was to work with Bob and try to put together a list of some of the duties that he's either currently doing or could be asked to be doing in the future, just to give you a better idea of everything he does? I think you're the one that...
I think it's a good idea.
Well, certainly, I'd be happy to work with you. I mean, we can put that together and bounce some ideas off of you, if that makes sense to the board, to bring back in that way.
Just want to be sitting here and we make the decision and somebody goes, whoops, we forgot about that one.
No?
Because we've done that before. All right, anything else this evening? Entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support. Motion by Trustee Claney, second by Trustee Harper. All those in favor say aye. 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 Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you.